Hi, this is Harry Clark, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who plays bluegrass.
My guest on Bluegrass Jam Along this week is a recent winner of IBMA's Momentum Instrumentalist of the Year. And the reason he's on the podcast is A, because he's great, and B, I've interviewed a couple of people recently who've just had nothing but good things to say about him, both Bronwyn Keith Hines and Dan Tyminski. When I spoke to them, were singing his praises, and I thought, this is somebody I need to speak to. So my guest on the podcast this week is Harry Clark. Harry, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, glad to be here, Matt. It's good to see you.
Congratulations on the IBMA award. That's fantastic.
Thanks, man. Totally blindsided by it, but I'll take it.
Yeah. It's great. I'd love to get onto some of the records you've made and the bands you're playing with, but I'd love to sort of start out on how you got into the mandolin in the first place and whether it was sort of so many people I speak to come from musical families and grew up around instruments, around playing. And I'm just curious whether that was the case for you or whether it was sort of something that you picked up for yourself.
Right. Well, my brother and I, when I was probably about 6 years old, started taking guitar lessons. He's a little bit older than I am. And just from this dude at a church in the town we were living in. And, this guy knew all the youth minister chords, so like 3.5, 4 chords. My brother was able to pick up on them. But me at the time, being kind of a little feller, I couldn't really wrap my left hand around a guitar neck and reach the chords and stuff. So it's really hard. And I really wanted to play something, I'd kind of toyed with the idea of playing drums. But my parents really didn't want a drum set in the house for obvious reasons, an adolescent beating on the drums all hours of the day probably drive you nuts. So anyway, my brother played guitar for a few years and I just watched, and we ended up moving to a town in North Arkansas where I grew up for the better part of my life, from South Arkansas. And my mom met this guy at college, who gave, lessons on banjo, guitar, mandolin, ukulele, all these stringed instruments. And, she took me to him because she knew I wanted to play something. And at that time I was kind of interested in maybe playing fiddle or banjo. I'd kind of heard a bunch of Irish music that had the tenor banjo in it and fiddle, and I was really into that. But he recommended that I try mandolin out, and he gave me one lesson, a 30-minute lesson. And by the end of that half hour, I was really hooked on it. I learned like a G, C, and D. I guess I was about 10 years old when I learned that. And, all it took was about 30 minutes, and I just didn't want to do anything else. And then I got into bluegrass about 6 months later, after I'd really got into playing mandolin. My dad took me and my brother to see Ricky Skaggs' Kentucky Thunder. That kind of blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like that. Ricky played mandolin just blistering fast, and then he'd put the mandolin down. At the time, he had Andy Leftwich in the band, and Andy picked the mandolin up, and it was also just crazy. So my mind was completely blown, and that's when I really got hooked on bluegrass.
Was bluegrass on your radar before that? Because Irish music's a pretty strong choice for a 6-year-old who, hasn't not grown up in Ireland.
Yeah, I got this grandma who's always had like very eclectic tastes in music. Like she likes everything from Ray Charles to Enya or Anya, however you say her name, and she would go somewhere and just see like a cassette of Irish music and would just buy it. So she had like this large collection of different music and a good bit of world music too. And for some reason, at a young age, I just got one of those Celtic albums from her, and just, upbeat Celtic music with a good fiddle and the whistles and the drums and stuff that'll get you going at any age. I feel like it's just it's catching to the ear. But I'd heard bluegrass before. "Oh Brother Where Art Thou" came out, and that was just kind of an instant hit for my family and me. I saw it when I was probably 6 or 7 and really dug it. And we got the soundtrack for the movie, so that was always around. But I hadn't really seen it up close and live. I hadn't really gotten a lot of opportunity to be in the room while bluegrass is being played. And that's really how I feel Like that's really when you get bit by the bug, is when you see it up close and personal. It's just so much different to see it in an intimate setting than to even just hear it on a record, which I love listening to bluegrass records, and most fans do, but everyone knows, if you know, that seeing bluegrass live is just a different experience altogether. And it's different than any other music too, because, there's not the speakers and the amps, and it's just only air between you and the instrument being played. So it's kind of, I don't know, something to it. I got bit by the bug.
I think that's the joy of like purely acoustic music, is you get to sort of see it being made. Like everything that is happening in front of you, and there's no sort of effects or electricity, or there's no, like, what you see people doing relates directly to the sound you hear.
The magic is purely between the musician and their instrument and nothing else.
Yeah.
That's what's special about, like, the traditional Celtic music too, and stuff along that lines, traditional jazz and stuff like that. There's just something about being in a small space and just the instruments, with or without a microphone, just putting out sound and hitting you in the room. It's special. So I really got hooked on bluegrass after that. And from then on out, I was just looking for any bluegrass record, specifically with a mandolin, that I could find,
And what was what was the first thing that sort of hooked you after that? Who was the first player you sort of really noticed as a player in their own right?
Adam Steffi, for sure. I'd heard Nickel Creek, and of course I'd heard the Oh Brother record with Compton, who's later in my kind of musical journey, I've really gotten into the Monroe style players a lot. It's kind of taken me a while to really get why it's so great, and now it's kind of all I want to hear. But like the first guy who really got me was Adam Steffi. I got a copy of So Long, So Wrong, the Alison Krauss and Union Station record. It was the last one that Adam was on, but just his mandolin tone was so huge and clean, and his timing was so good. It was just like, man, this guy, he made it sound like no one else had ever made it sound, And he's kind of he's a legend for sure in his own right. So even though he doesn't play a lot these days, but he was the first cat.
And some of those parts that he played with Alison are sort of, you can't imagine the song without him almost. They're as much part of the song as the chorus is.
Exactly. Super tasteful player too.
Yeah. And so that's interesting, actually. An interesting point about taking longer to get into the Monroe style stuff, and that being something you almost, like the way you talk about it, almost like you sort of grew into it almost.
Yeah, for sure. It's maybe like a real hoppy beer. It's just like an acquired taste. The more you have it, the more you're kind of like, oh yeah, actually it's pretty good.
It's funny. I interviewed Jared Walker earlier this year, and he was sort of saying the same kind of thing, that he really appreciates the sort of the clean style of some of the more modern players, and it's an incredible thing, but also that there's just something about the slightly rough around the edges stuff that gets him really every time. Mm-hmm. And that comes out in his playing, and I think maybe in yours as well. There's definitely tremolo is something you seem to use a lot of, and I wonder whether that sort of comes out of that's a lot of double stops and tremolo in some of the older stuff.
All right. Well, so I grew up in Arkansas, and as far as the pickers who were around, there weren't just a ton of pickers. They were all kind of spread out over the state too. But there was one guy in particular named Bill Nesbitt, who's still a family friend and a great musician, a great guitar player, also really kind of into, Django Reinhardt guitar playing. But he's kind of like Arkansas's Monroe mandolin aficionado, and he's just a great Monroe style player. And being younger, I wanted to learn all this I wanted to learn to play like Adam Steffi and like Wayne Benson and, Alan Bybee, Dealey and all that stuff, all those really clean players. But Bill was just such a part of my, my musical experience, just being at festivals and shows and local jams and stuff, that I think, I just subconsciously picked up on a lot from him, because he is kind of like one of the best mandolin players to come out of Arkansas. And, but he had a real great tremolo, and he would incorporate that a lot. And so just being around him, watching him do that, it was nice to kind of learn how to, play backup with a tremolo, because with a mandolin, you don't get that long bow like you do on a fiddle. Like, its voice kind of the same, but, it's such a staccato-y sound. It doesn't have a ton of sustain. So a tremolo, you can really play lightly and play tremolo and add a lot of sustain to a song and kind of create a voice rather than just like a plink.
Yeah, totally. It's funny, isn't it? If you sort of think about it in those terms, a sort of a mandolin played with a pick is a fairly inefficient way to get a sound out of an instrument in some ways, but it gives it like all of its character, and all the things people have done to compensate for that over the years make it very much what it is.
Right. And tremolo can also be like it can be very like sweet and kind of precious sounding and add like pretty texture. But then, if you listen to Monroe, he would play tremolo on songs, and it's like the song is like 120 beats a minute, and he just jumps right in at the front of the solo, just, really giving her hell on the tremolo. And it almost like makes you feel uncomfortable, it kind of makes you have to adjust in your seat. That guy, Chris Henry, I don't know if you know Chris Henry or not, but he's a great mandolin player from here in the States. He lives out in Virginia, and he's really, really gone down the Monroe like path and learned a lot of that Frank Wakefield stuff. But his playing is so intense, and he plays a lot with tremolo, and it's not always like a slow, pretty thing too. Sometimes it's really intense and in your face, and it's kind of, it's kind of the equivalent of the dive bomb on an electric guitar of the mandolin, just intense. And
it is that thing sort of talking about your ear getting used to some of that stuff. I remember when I first started listening to bluegrass, listening to some of the Bill Monroe stuff and some of the earlier stuff, your ear sort of needs to adjust a bit, and because it sort of doesn't go out of its way to accommodate you. It just does what it does, and that's sort of what the appeal of it is. It's not trying to sort of soften the blow. It's just trying to create a strong statement that makes you want to listen. And it is, it certainly took my ears a while to adjust to that.
Yeah, it's there's emotion in there that you don't want to confront. You don't want to come face to face with. But I think the older you get, the more hardships you have, the more that kind of sound relates to people. You're like, oh yeah, that's what I'm hearing now. I didn't get it when I was younger. I hadn't lived enough, but now it kind of makes sense. It's like, oh yeah, that's that emotion.
Yeah. And sort of, so from that point on, what was the first point you started playing with a band? What was the first band you joined? We'll be right back with you just after this. Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins. If you're attending the NAMM show in January, stop by the Collings booth to say hello to the team, get hands-on with their selection of customised acoustics and electrics, and check out some exciting new prototypes they're working on for 2024. They'll also have a few of their world-class artists on hand demoing various instruments. And if you can't attend, don't forget to follow their Instagram and Facebook accounts throughout the show for photos, videos, and the latest news. Collings guitars are hand-built from the Sound Up in Austin, Texas. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. If one of your 2024 resolutions is to improve as a musician, Peghead Nation is the place to go. They have 65 streaming video courses for guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, dobro, bass, and ukulele from some of the leading names in acoustic music. Courses cover bluegrass, old time, Irish music, and swing, plus lessons dedicated to improvisation, theory, and ear training. Your first course is just $20 a month, and you can add more for $10. Try any course free for a month with the promo code JAMALONG. Make 2024 a year of more music at pegheadnation.com.
So I grew up playing, my brother's a great guitar player, and me and him played some regional stuff. We played with my mom a little bit. She got an upright bass, and we had the traditional family band, mom on upright bass, and then me and my brother. And we'd have some friends around, I grew up with, there's a family, they're from Missouri, but a lot of them live here in Nashville now. They're called the Myers. John Meyer and Mary Meyer are two in particular that folks might know. John's a great banjo player, and Mary's a great mandolin player. And, we kind of grew up in the same region. They were from South Missouri, and we were from, kind of north central Arkansas. So there was like a 2.5 hour driving distance between us. But we all kind of hit it off one year. We met at a festival in Missouri and played a lot of music with John in particular. And anyway, we did the regional stuff for a while. And then my brother, when he was 20, he got a gig with a band from Nashville, this brother and sister duo. They're called the Roys. And he played with them for about 6 months. And he decided to move on from it. But I had a buddy who was playing bass in the band at the time. And, Jed quit. And I'd been playing guitar kind of as like a, like side instrument just for fun. And my buddy was like, man, you should try out for this gig, see if you could do it. And so I kind of learned the songs and went and tried out for that gig on guitar. So my first real, quote unquote pro gig was on guitar. And it was with a band called the Roys. I lived in Nashville for most of 2012 and was on the road with them. Yeah, they had a bus and we just rolled around. I think they were sponsored by some energy drink. And so that's how they could roll around. And, being 18, first time really away from home, it was awesome. I had a great time,
The full experience.
I got the full experience. Yeah. I moved to Nashville when I was 18, lived here for about a year and did that gig. And then I left that gig because, I like playing guitar. I still love playing guitar, but mandolin's kind of where my heart is. And there's a band, kind of I call them the Southeastern Conference of bluegrass bands because, everyone in this band, Volume 5 that I ended up joining was from everywhere from South Carolina to Arkansas, because I moved back to Arkansas. And I joined this band, Volume 5, and they're still playing today. They still got, putting out records, and there's some great musicians in that band. One of my favorite mandolin players, a guy named Aaron Ramsey, plays mandolin for him now. And he's sick. But I played with that band for probably 4 years before I just kind of quit. I turned 22 and quit playing with them and thought I'd just kind of hang music up for a while. I don't know. Once you do it, it's kind of hard to just quit cold turkey, So then I moved back to Nashville and I've just kind of played on and off with different bands here and there. My last venture was about a 4-year stint with a band called the Wooks from Kentucky. And we've kind of gone on hiatus since this spring. Certain members of that band are now like CJ Kane, the guitar player, is playing with this guy, Tyler Childers, who's kind of become this cult hero,
Yeah, I think he's playing over here in London soon, actually. I saw his name pop up. Yeah.
I think they are. You should go see him, man. Tyler's great. He's an amazing songwriter. He's got a great band. It's just kind of full of old time and bluegrass musicians. But they all play rock too. So it's, it's pretty cool. But now, I'm playing with Dan Tyminski now and the band East Nash Grass, which I kind of helped start with some buddies back in 2017, I believe. So kind of just kept going.
I was going to ask you about those two bands. So the Wooks is sort of on hiatus now, but East Nash Grass is sort of full steam ahead.
Yeah, East Nash Grass is pretty much full steam ahead. We're actually working on a record right now. We got to go in tomorrow and Wednesday, and we're going to finish up some final touches on it, sing some harmonies.
Cool.
And, kind of patch up what needs to be patched up, and hopefully have it out by the beginning of next year.
So I sort of first came across you guys when I interviewed Bronwyn Keith Hines about the record she made, because you were obviously in the band for that. And James Key sings on it as well. And he's not somebody I'd heard before, but he's got a great voice.
Yeah, excellent.
So, that's, just really cool combination in there. And some of the people you play with Dan Tyminski are also in East Nash Grass, right?
Yeah. So, so myself, Matty Denton, the fiddle player for East Nash Grass, is also in Dan's band, and Gavin Largent, our dobro player, is in Dan's band. And so East Nash Grass was started kind of as just a one-time gig at this bar called Dee's Country Cocktail Lounge. It's in Madison, Tennessee. And, it was originally me playing bass, Corey Walker and Jared Walker, the Walker brothers, played, and a guy named Ryan Cavanaugh actually played banjo. He kind of got the gig. He played one gig, and then afterwards he was like, man, why don't you take this over? He's like, I'm not really interested in pursuing it. I just want to do it one time. So I kind of ended up putting, putting some stuff together. It was always kind of a crapshoot for the first few weeks of who was going to be there. And then one night I went to the Station Inn to see a show, and I met this guy, James Key. And we talked a little bit, and I said, I ended up telling him about this Monday night gig I had at this bar called D's. I was like, man, I'd love for you to come play guitar and mandolin. Just, come sing and play, and we'll have some special guests. And like, from then on out, it's been, he's been in the band. He just came to fill in, and he just kind of stuck around and really helped grow the band too. James has done so much to help the band get to where it is now, And, we had a few different members at first, and we'd have, people float in because Nashville's full of road musicians,
Yeah.
So, it's hard to just peg down someone for every Monday night. But after a few different variations in about 5 years, we kind of had mostly the same band for probably the last 3 years.
And did it sort of, I was going to say, did it sort of settle down in terms of roles? If you all sort of started off doing a bit of everything, did that sort of take shape?
Yeah, and I actually started out as the guitar player in that band too, and recorded the first record with me playing guitar and James playing mandolin, because he's a great mandolin player. But I was on the road with the Wooks for an amount of time, and we had just played a private gig. Me, James, and Corey played a private gig with some guys in Idaho where James played guitar and I played mandolin. And after that, he was just kind of like, man, we should just keep it like this, because, at least when you have to miss a show, I'll be able to still play guitar, and it's like, we'll at least have that role filled, if we can't find another mandolin player to fill in. And so now it's just James plays guitar, I play mandolin. And Corey Walker, who's Jared's brother, plays banjo. Jeff Picker plays bass. And
is that kind of a preference thing for you? Do you prefer the mandolin, or is it just the way?
Yeah, I'd rather play it in a band setting. If I just sit around the house and sing a little bit, playing guitar is fun. And I still like to play guitar, but mandolin's just kind of like, it's what I started on. It's kind of my first instrument, and it's still my primary love.
I was going to ask you about that, actually, about sort of singing, because, guitar is obviously an easier instrument to accompany yourself with. But I heard in an interview a while ago, maybe you talking about sort of singing more over the past few years, and whether that sort of requires you to think about playing the mandolin slightly differently if you're accompanying yourself.
Yeah, it's made me have to simplify the way I play, and really just kind of hone in on what timing feels like rather than what it sounds like, I didn't really start singing much until I moved when I was 20. So it would have been 2014 into 2014. I moved to East Tennessee, and there's a moonshine distillery in a town called Gatlinburg. And they hire out bluegrass bands to play like every day. There's at least 2 bands that play, a couple hour shifts. And I went out there and ended up playing in a band. Was out there for about a year. And I just kind of was at a point where I had to sing, I was playing guitar in that band too. And there wasn't really a definite lead singer in the band. So I was just like, man, this is something I gotta learn to do. I kind of hated doing it at first because singing's never really came natural to me. Like playing music, playing an instrument feels a lot more natural than singing. But it's definitely something that's, for me, has been more learned than just really able to do, Some people can just sing. I got 2 sisters who just sing, and it's not because they practice it. They can just do it. Just got the ear for it, and I don't. It's been more learned.
There's loads of sort of different genres of music where you can get away with being an instrumentalist and not really singing, but it's much harder in the sort of bluegrass world, isn't it, to be in a band and never have to sing?
Yeah, it really is. Luckily in bluegrass, you can kind of do this thing where you're not actually technically a good singer, but if you got enough like character in your voice and enough conviction, people will be able to endure and enjoy your singing anyway. It's kind of weird, because I never thought of Monroe as technically like a great singer, but there's something about him that's so real and true when he sings. It's you kind of like it anyway. Yeah, whether it's technically correct singing or,
I mean, so many of the singers that I like, wouldn't necessarily be described as great. I love listening to Steve Earle sing, for example, but he's by no means a great singer, but he's a brilliant deliverer of a story in song form.
Absolutely, man. Same goes for cats like Johnny Cash and Bob Dylan. Like those guys technically weren't the most proficient vocalists, but you sure believe what they're singing to you, you know?
Yeah, totally. I hear a bit of that sort of, you talk about Bill Monroe, I hear a bit of that in Michael Daves these days. He's just got a sort of an old sound to him that sort of, it's maybe not unique at the moment, but it stands out and it's, you know, really hits you.
Yeah, it does. It does hit you. It's convicting for sure.
Yeah. And so the album the album's nearly finished now then, the East Nash Grass album. Yeah,
it's almost done. It's a bunch of original material brought to the band by I wrote a song on there. Maddie wrote a fiddle tune. James Key wrote a song. Corey Walker wrote a song, and then we reached out to other writers like our buddy Christian Ward, who actually just won an award, IBMA award for Song of the Year. He wrote that song "Red Daisy" that Billy Strings recorded. He
co-wrote that with Jared. They wrote that together, didn't they? It's a great song.
Yep. So Jared is a great writer, and Christian's a really brilliant writer. He's really great, and every time he writes something, I'm excited to hear it. And so we got a few songs from him, and then a couple songs are covers, but they're quite obscure. Like we got an Uncle Dave Macon song on our record that probably no one has heard in 90 years for the most part. And then James grew up playing bluegrass, but also listening to old country and really knows a deep well of old country songs. And so there's some stuff that we pulled from that. But yeah, the record's almost done. I'm pretty pumped about it.
Do you have a sense of when that's sort of going to be due out yet?
Yeah, we're thinking probably like January or February of 23. Hope so, you know.
Yeah, because you talk to people sometimes, it's like the record's in the can. We've just got to find time to all be able to tour it at the same time, you know.
Yeah, and it's kind of been an issue with three of us playing in Dan Tyminski's band. You know, it's like really trying to be able to book shows with East Nash Grass and Dan and not really create conflicts for either, you know, keep everything civil and, you know, make everyone happy. So this year or for next year, it's looking like we're going to have a pretty half and half schedule of East Nash Grass gigs and Dan Tyminski gigs. And so we've been talking to some of Dan's people too, and they're kind of helping us, you know, get our trajectories in line to where there's no overlapping and no one's really having to cancel anything to let people play. So, you know, there's a bit of a song and dance that goes along with it, but everyone's kind of, you know, we're looking a little deeper into the future. You know, it's next year we're going to play more festivals than we ever have with East Nash Grass. And hopefully as the years go on, it'll progress into something where we can, you know, kind of just commit to that and make that our forefront band, you know.
It's such a common thing though, isn't it? You know, there's so few people who are just in one band and that's it. And in the world of bluegrass, people often have more than one project on the go.
It's hard to do, but I think there's value in doing it at some point, like everyone kind of committing and going, yeah, let's just see what we can do with this one thing for, you know, a couple of years. Let's see what it looks like if we really work at it, you know. But all in due time, you know. And it's looking more probable that East Nash is going to be a lot more busy in 24 than 23. And 23 is already looking busier than the last, you know, 5 years that we've had.
And given a couple of those years can't have been very busy at all, that must be nice to look ahead to.
Exactly. It is nice. You know, it's a nice feeling after, you know, going 2.5 years of no work to be like, oh yeah, I got a bunch of work coming. I'm not going to have time to not do anything. You know, I'm going to have a pretty tight schedule, but it's good. Yeah.
And then when did you start sort of playing with Dan then?
So I started playing with Dan at the beginning of this year. You know, he had Adam Steffi playing mandolin in the band, and Adam ended up going a separate way. And since I already had two band members from East Nash Grass and Dan's band, and I had already known Dan's current banjo player and bass player, from years of just being in the same festival circuits. I guess I had a good good foot in the door, so they say, from the get-go. So Dan just kind of asked them who they were thinking, he should get. And they all kind of recommended me, which was very, super nice, very flattering. And, I got a message from Dan asking if I'd be interested. And I was like, oh, yeah, totally.
And he's no slouch on the mandolin himself, is he?
No, it's taken me up until like the last month to actually feel comfortable playing in front of him, because he's another one of those cats who I just listened to as a child. Talk about one of your heroes. That guy is definitely one of them. Guitar playing and singing and mandolin playing. He's just, I've been listening to him for most of my life. And so it's totally surreal to like be standing next to that guy and watching that sound that you've heard your whole life come through a stereo system, just come through right there, 3 feet away from your face.
Yeah, particularly if Oh Brother was sort of a starting point for you. That's kind of, his voice is such a huge part of that record.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. He sings just like George Clooney. It's crazy.
I interviewed him recently, and I interviewed him mostly about the Tony Rice EP that he put out, which is fantastic. But he was talking about the record as well, because that was all finished by the time I spoke to him and coming out at some point next year as well. And I've interviewed like loads of people on this website, this podcast, from people sort of in their 70s through to people in their 20s who just starting out in their careers. And I've never heard anybody sound more excited about a new record than Dan Tyminski sounds about this one. He just sounds thrilled about it. He said he's been involved in some big records in his years, but he's as excited about this as he's been about anything.
Yeah, he seems super pumped. And, as one of his band members, it's excited to see him excited about, work you've done for him. And he's been real, it's been real eye-opening working for him, man. It's kind of, when you play music with someone of Dan's level or any of these kind of legendary musicians, I've been lucky enough to play with David Greer a good bit, and who's just like an amazing guitar player. It's like when you really get to sit next to these guys and be up and close and personal to what they're doing, you're able to pick up on the nuances of how they make their music, even more so than just listening to them through a record. There's things that you don't get through a record that you will get from being in the same room, just being a few feet away from them, and being around Dan while he sings and plays has kind of been eye-opening. I feel like I've grown more in the last year as a musician than I probably ever have in my full career, because, I've been able to be around Dan, And
it's funny, because we were talking about the Tony Rice EP, he was sort of saying the same about Tony, about, just being able to take something from somebody else, and the idea that that's kind of being passed down it's something sort of beautiful about that. But also just the thing he talked about really sort of clearly when we spoke, he was talking about like not wanting to take too many breaks on this record because he just enjoyed listening to you guys and sort of reacting to you. It's one of the things he mentioned most about Tony's playing, that he would listen and react, above and beyond anything else. And he just said, he was just really happy to see what you guys were doing and sort of follow that, which is it's quite a thing to say for somebody of his stature.
One of the things about Dan and Tony is they both have such distinctive rhythm styles. And like, while they can both solo, like Dan's a great lead guitar player, but like his rhythm creates such a platform for every other instrument to be able to kind of freely, display what they can do, like it's different playing with him. There's very few people I played with where I felt as supported as I do in Dan's band from a rhythm aspect, We got Grace Davis playing bass, who's just a phenomenal bass player. She's excellent and works well with Dan, and Dan's rhythm is just like, that's a huge part of his sound. And so it's been awesome to get to play with. And I think he has a lot of fun playing rhythm, And the same with Tony. It's like Tony's leads were iconic. His singing was iconic, but the way that he played rhythm guitar was so important for the other people like he was playing with, to be able to really, get their point across with what they were trying to say with their instruments. And playing with Dan's like that, it really, having a good rhythm guitar and bass player really creates a platform for you to be able to, play freely, but in time, creatively, but like stay in within the bounds of the song. I don't know. It's cool. His rhythm playing's super unique, and he played great rhythm on this record. It's a very exciting project to be a part of.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear it. I mean, I totally agree. I love Dan's rhythm playing. It's one of those things that almost sounds too easy, a bit like listening to Tim O'Brien sing, or it's just like it just feels like he's not thinking about it at all, which is obviously not the case. But there's just such a kind of, I can't really explain it any better than you. Even just listening to it, you feel like everything is going to be all right. There's nothing to worry about. It's just there, and it's
kind of like breathing.
Yeah. Beautiful to listen to. So I'm excited for the record. A couple of things I've read about you, and I'd just keen to chat to you about the mandolins you play. But a couple of stories that I heard. One about a mandolin going missing in the post for quite some time. And another one about you having your car stolen with your mandolin in it and getting both the car and the mandolin back.
Yeah, so I had a couple different mandolins throughout the years. And I went and hung out at a buddy's house one night. He had a little fire in his backyard, a little campfire. And we just kind of hung out, and we're spending some time. And for some reason, I thought it was a good idea to leave my keys in my car unlocked. With the mandolin in the back. And, I was probably sitting 20 feet away from where my car was, but it was blocked by a wooden picket fence, And there's one point in the night at about, it was probably like midnight, where I heard this car door open, a car start and drive off. And I thought, man, that sounded super close. It sounded like it came from the driveway, And it turns out it did, and it was my car. And this fella had just been wandering the neighborhood that we were in and decided to look in my car, and the keys were in it. He jumped in and took it for a joyride, had my mandolin in it. I don't think he knew really what the mandolin was. He might not even known it was back there. The cops picked him up the next day. He'd he'd ridden about 450 miles throughout the night, just riding around, I guess just waiting to get picked up, but luckily the cops found it, and my mandolin was in the car, and he'd left a couple things in the car, like a brand new pack of Newport cigarettes and like some bootleg Jason Aldean CDs. So, it was a real score for me in the end.
So like between that, like the amount of gas that he used and the things he left, you probably ended up about even at the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, at least I could do is thank the guy for leaving me some knickknacks and cigarettes there at the end.
And what mandolin was that went on that joyride with him?
That mandolin was made by a guy named James Burnaby, who's from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, that area. He doesn't build anymore, but he was a great builder, and he built that mandolin for me. And I still know where that mandolin is. I got a buddy who ended up purchasing it from me. I was actually thinking about maybe hollering at him to see if I could buy it back the other day, because it's a good mandolin. I wouldn't mind having it back. And then the mandolin that got lost in the mail, there's a great builder out of Portland right now, a guy who's kind of following in the footsteps of this builder named John Sullivan, who was from, Oregon. He passed away too young. He was a great builder. He was kind of like coming up to be one of the better known cats. And, Andrew Marlin from Watch House plays one of his mandolins. Caleb Clotter has one of his mandolins. This is John Sullivan. But, this fella who lives out there now named Matt Rulin, who's a phenomenal builder. I got a mandolin from him, and he'd finished it up and sent it in the mail. I bought it through this store in Montana, and he sent it to that store. And this was, still like when COVID was pretty hot, and the U.S. mail really had a pretty hard time, during some of those months. And I guess we'll just back up and stuff. And this mandolin I bought got lost in the mail for about, I don't know, 5 months maybe.
Wow.
Couldn't tell you how many months it was. I think it got shipped to me in like January, and it was May when it got found. I'd kind of given up hope on it, but
Yeah.
it came through. It just took a really long joyride.
I had a very similar experience during the pandemic with a guitar that I bought but it was a much shorter experience and a much cheaper instrument, so it was slightly less frightening. But it kind of,
it scares you, man. And Matt felt so bad. He was so cool about it. He was like, man, I'm going to build you another mandolin just how you want it, all this stuff. He was very cool. He felt so bad. I'm just glad it showed up, and it's a great mandolin too.
Is that sort of largely what you play these days?
So that's not the mandolin I play right now. I was able to get I got a Gilchrist.
Oh, wow.
In April. Yeah, I've always wanted one. It's kind of been a dream mandolin. And one showed up that was just kind of like, it was the right time for the right price. And some things worked out, and I was able to get it. And that's what I got now. And I love it. So it's kind of my main axe. It's what I played on most of the Dan record and all of this East Nash record that's coming out.
Cool. So so I normally get to this point in a conversation and ask people what they got coming up next, but it sounds like you pretty much know what you've got coming up for the next 2 years.
Yeah, for the most part, it's kind of set in motion and in stone. Like, yeah, this is what you're going to be doing. And it's kind of been my plan for the last few years to make this work, especially when I got the call from Dan, because Dan's going to have, he's obviously, an in-demand musician. He still plays with Alison Krauss and he does solo shows and things like that. So it's definitely wanted to play with Dan while I could and want to play with him while I can. But at the same time, it's nice to have an outlet for your own music. And that's kind of what East Nash Grass is right now. Like, it's kind of allows me to be creative and put my own, music out there and collaborate with musicians who are my age, kind of a group of my peers.
Yeah, and I guess with Dan, Alison Krauss has been off playing with Robert Plant for a while now, and that'll come to an end at some point. And
at some point, yeah,
that'll kick back in again.
Sure, absolutely. So it's kind of the game plan has been set for me.
Yeah.
If all goes right, it'll go well.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting, and looking forward to hearing the record. So it sounds like yours will come out before Dan's. I think Dan's was due out a little bit later in the year, wasn't it?
Okay, yeah, something like that.
From what I heard.
Yeah, he's I'm not all sure what he's doing, but I'm sure he's putting the magical final touches on it.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, thanks for joining me today. It's been really cool getting to hear a bit of your story, and it sounds like you've got an incredibly exciting couple of years coming up.
Yeah, hope so.
It feels like East Nash Grass is sort of full of people we're going to hear more of, because I think, unless I misremembered, Maddie won a Momentum Award last year, didn't she?
Yeah, last year, and then like in 2016, Corey Walker won one, and everyone in this band in East Nash Grass has done something in the bluegrass world. Like our bass player Jeff Bicker, he just recently, he played the last 4 or 5 years with Ricky Skaggs and his band. And he also is engaged to Sarah Jarosz, and they play music together too. And then like Gavin Largent, who's the dobro player, he's played with Blue Highway and Daleen Vincent and Michael Cleveland, and Corey Walker's played with Tim O'Brien and Sierra Hull and all these people, and so it's kind of all these, we've all had stints as sidemen, and now we're kind of coming together as a collective and putting our own spin on a band sound,
And since I sort of heard of you guys, sort of heard of the band, it just feels like all of your names are just more and more cropping up in conversations. And I see, it feels like there's a real bit of energy building around what you're doing.
Yeah, that's what we hope.
Cool. Well, best of luck with it.
Thanks, man.
I'm looking forward to hearing it. Thanks so much for taking the time out to talk to me today.
Yeah, glad to do it. Thanks for having me.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins, making some of the finest guitars and mandolins in the world since the 1970s. Visit collingsguitars.com and find out why.